The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another edition of the Hard Rock Empire on this Sunday evening Eastern Time. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. We are back for another week of the best rock and metal music from around the world. And this week we're going to be talking about the music of March the 14th, 2025, and some good stuff again that we bring you on this approximately hour of music podcast that we have each and every Sunday night. And for those of you over in Europe that have switched to summertime, we're an hour different than we were last week. So I think everybody's got their time changed now. So hopefully you'll be able to lock in and join us each and every week on the Hard Rock Empire at whatever time works best for you, and of course on demand as well. Joining me in the studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. I'm excited. We have news pertaining to Napster, which, takes me back to my younger days, and I really wish we had been kind of around talking music at that point in time, because I think that would have been a very tumultuous time in the industry, but also some really good music as far as what we picked, and excited to talk about it. Yeah,
there's some really good stuff this week. Really excited about that, and also, like you said, some throwback news, which is kind of wild, and of course, we'll wrap up the show with our news segment that we started last week, the Power Trio, where we will ask some sort of question about the top three of something, and then we'll talk about what our favorites are. And of course, you can go on our Discord, which I will share the link to in just a moment. Join our Discord. You can give us your opinions each and every week on our Power Trio. And this is a pretty interesting question. We'll get to it in the last segment of today's show, but certainly something that gets talked about from time to time, which will be the topic of today's Power Trio. We got news to get through before we get there, and we're going to start things off with Napster. Yes, like Mike said, Napster is still alive. I don't know if I would say alive and well, but it is alive, according to Metal Injections. I'll share this story in just a moment. Napster just got bought again, this time for $207 million by a company called Infinite Reality. I'm honestly shocked that the Napster name, let alone whatever might come with it in 2025, is worth $207 million. But it supposedly is. We always talk about in professional sports, you're worth what somebody's willing to pay you, and Napster's evidently worth $200 million in 2025, which is pretty wild. Mike, your thoughts, like you said, kind of a throwback to 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. You think about retro things coming back and being popular again. You think people are buying vinyl. There are people wanting, portable cassette tape players to make a comeback. There's all that stuff going on. Napster is essentially a retro way to listen to music. It's no different than your old cassette player, only it was obviously virtual and at the time deemed to be illegal as far as how people were acquiring music. But yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride for this company when you think they shut down after filing bankruptcy back in 2002, bought by Best Buy in 2008, and merged with Rhapsody, which is another name I hadn't heard in a while.
Yeah.
In 2020, it was sold to a VR concert company, Melody VR. 2022, sold to Hivemind and Algorand. And then finally now being acquired for $207 million by this Infinite Reality group. To read his statements and what he's talking about wanting to do with it, it's kind of in line with a lot of what we've talked about as far as where the industry's going. And John Acunto, the co-founder and CEO, is trying to kind of work Napster into kind of this evolving relationship between the fan and the artist and kind of bring them closer together. And I think you see that with Bandcamp, you see that with certain things that I've bought physically lately that have come with personalized letters or autographs or other goodies, just ways that bands are trying to monetize and maybe unique ways to really become more like content creators as far as the economy goes.
I think the question, though, and we've seen it on the anime side with a company like Crunchyroll that started out in piracy and then, built a good reputation, and now it's kind of maybe in the process of sullying that good reputation again as some sort of bell curve of goodwill that they've run the gamut on. But I still wonder, there are people our age who maybe have a fondness, a nostalgia for Napster, but for bands specifically, I just wonder, is there any negative connotation to jumping on board with these guys, considering the whole history? And of course, the article talks about Lars Ulrich, who, of course, Metallica kind of being involved, hindsight 2020, Metallica kind of knew what they were doing when they were kind of right, even though they were the ones that, maybe people were like, why are you guys talking about that? You're going to make your money either way, which is in the end why they did. But I just wonder if there's that negative connotation for certain bands, especially maybe legacy bands, to then jump on the board with this new Napster, even though it's so far removed from the old Napster.
Yeah, that's difficult because, again, the whole Napster debacle occurred, 23 years ago is when it had to file for bankruptcy. So I don't know if a lot of those artists have long since moved on, or, a lot of the ones that we're talking about now weren't even really around for that. I don't know what the feeling is. Now, if it were up to me and based on kind of what they're wanting to do, which is kind of merge the social aspect with the streaming music and sales aspect, I would have first checked to see if maybe I could acquire MySpace for a reasonable price. Because to me, it's remembered way more fondly for the positive side. There wasn't really that negative connotation that unfortunately Napster was associated with. So I don't know what its current valuation is, but to me that's where I would have gone as far as what can we revive from the early digital age to kind of become that new cool thing that bands and fans can get on. I think a lot of the music fan population would love a new MySpace that functioned in that kind of capacity.
It is probably the only social media out there that is completely fondly remembered by everybody. Maybe because it went away and there wasn't the opportunity for people to come in and ruin it like it's happened with pretty much every other social media.
I think most people, sadly, had long since moved on by the time it did get ruined.
Yeah.
I don't think people at the time jumped all over Facebook and left MySpace in the dust. And I think because of that, it's way too easy to have those rose-tinted glasses, because my last experience with MySpace was a positive one.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe, who knows? If Napster's worth $200 million, maybe MySpace is worth more than that. I don't know, but interesting to see. We'll see if there's any follow-up stories on this or what comes of it, or in a year from now, we're going to be hearing about it getting sold again to somebody else and just kicking that can on down the road. Another news story we'll talk a little bit about is the band Foreigner, or at least what is Foreigner in 2025. Obviously, a lot of the original members have long since moved on from the band, and in most cases moved on from music in general. Obviously, the band's been around for a long time. And the news kind of came out this week that Kelly Hansen, due to some issues, is not going to be going on their Latin American tour. So they've come up with a couple of different solutions. They have one of their bandmates evidently recording some of the hit songs in Spanish that will be performed in front of the Latin American crowd. But the other thing is they've gone to Lou Gramm, who, by all accounts, looked like he was done doing any kind of touring at the end of 2024. Of course, he long since had left Foreigner. And now he's going to be coming in to do some vocals during this Latin American tour. And, this is one of those ones where, there are certain bands where it's like Sebastian Bach and Skid Row. They're never getting back together. Like, it's a split. And then we have some where it's like bands have kind of gone their own way, but there's no hard feelings. And then you have this one, which is somewhere in the middle, where it's like, Lou Gramm was pretty much excommunicated for a lot of years. Kelly Hansen has been the lead singer for Foreigner for a long time now. And now you have Lou Gramm kind of coming back in to fill in, and yet there's still some kind of reservation there, like only having him sing certain songs, and it feels kind of messy. Don Jamieson had a really good post on X talking about, Lou Gramm being the singer for this Foreigner tribute band. It may be a little harsh, but not 100% inaccurate. But what do you make of all this? Because, it's a pretty wild story, honestly.
Yeah, it is. And I love the kind of interesting way they're going about solving this Kelly Hansen problem, as far as having Lou Maldonado do Spanish language versions of a lot of the songs. I think that would be really cool for the fans down in South America, treat for them. And last I'd heard, Lou Gramm sounded pretty good live, so that's kind of a double cool thing for those fans. They actually get to hear the real voice of the band. But yeah, you look at their current members, and I assume, is Mick Jones still touring with them? Like, I thought he had kind of backed away.
Yeah,
from touring.
I don't think he's really touring anymore either. Like, I don't think he's like
he's not out of the band, but I don't think
he's out on with the band anymore.
Yeah.
And he was pretty much it. He was the last remaining, original member.
Oh yeah, last year he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
Yeah.
So and that's why he hasn't been touring since 2023. So yeah, I mean, while it is harsh, this is kind of a tribute band, and obviously getting to see Jeff Pilson play, he's
tremendously
classic.
talented.
Yeah, I mean that nothing wrong with that. And when Kelly Hansen's with them, he's a great lead singer. So there's certainly that too. But yeah, I kind of read further down in the article, and they talked about an instance where they had entertained the idea of Graham coming back for some guest spots, but he would throw out songs that he wanted to sing, and at the time they were kind of being reluctant in letting him sing a lot of the obvious big songs, and he was not kind of the belief that was because of Kelly Hansen, and he didn't want Lou Graham kind of stealing his thunder as he's the current lead singer of the band, and kind of on the other side of that, Graham had mentioned some hostility he felt toward Hansen because Hansen, according to Graham, too closely mimicked the way that Lou Graham sang, even down to like the little ad-lib stuff on the album. Like he would do all those mannerisms and all those not part of the song, but just kind of the way his delivery was. And he thought, that it's one thing to sound like me, but kind of get your own shtick too. And yeah, it's an interesting situation, and I'm curious how this is all going to go down.
I mean, this feels like parents who are forced to stick together for the kids. It's like, they've got to keep seeing each other, and they keep they'll go out to lunch or something, but like clearly there's a breakup there. Like it's very strange. And the other thing too, and this is probably worth a bigger discussion. You mentioned Luis Maldonado doing the Spanish versions. I kind of wonder what some of the Latin American fans will think of that, because the one thing you note, and we watch a lot of concerts from like Vakken and, other international venues, those people all belt those lyrics out because they've been listening to those songs.
They know the English words.
Right, they do. And like if this was the one time in your life you had the chance to see Foreigner and you hear a Spanish version of Cold as Ice or Hot Blooded, would you feel a little disappointed about that you didn't actually get to hear especially when Lou Graham is in the building, you can actually hear the guy that you heard on your CD sing this song, and instead you get a Spanish version of it. We deal with this all the time on the anime side, where it's like you dub these songs, and it's like, well, some of them are really well done, some of them not so much. Like I'm curious kind of what those fans are going to think of that.
Yeah, and kind of going back to the anime side, when you're familiar with a certain song that's Japanese, the last thing you want is for them to just drastically alter it. Like when it's well done, it's one thing, but when it's not, you're taking away just a certain aspect that I'm familiar with. I don't know if that's necessary. I don't know. I think to some degree there's going to be a level of appreciation that, hey, they took the time to kind of retool these songs for the market. I guess it really just depends on how good is his singing going to be, and do you maybe find some ways to kind of trade off vocals between he and Graham on those songs, so you do get to hear kind of the classic English choruses on those as well. I'm sure there's a creative way to do it that will leave people satisfied.
Well, we'll find out. We'll see how it ends up turning out when they go on tour, because one way or another, I'm sure one of the music news sites that we read their stuff all the time, we'll cover it.
Yeah.
Especially if it doesn't go well. We'll certainly hear about it, and we'll pass it along as we go forward. But one more story to talk about, and this one is kind of one I'm interested in hearing this album when it comes out. The news that many big artists are going to be involved on a tribute release to the just legendary Canadian rock band Triumph. It's going to be called Magic Power, the All-Star Tribute to Triumph. And going to include people like Sebastian Bach, Nancy Wilson, Joey Belladonna, Slash, Jeff Keith. The article I posted actually has the track listing of the CD, which I believe comes out in June. And there's some songs and vocalists that are matched up on this list that I really want to hear their take on some of these classic Triumph songs. But always a cool thing when you get these tribute albums, and this one looks like it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, the list of artists that they've brought in to be a part of this is pretty wild. I mean, you have Sebastian Bach, Nancy Wilson, Joey Belladonna, Slash, Kenny Aronoff, Tommy Aldridge, Bumblefoot, Paul Gilbert, Nita Strauss. Like, not even just the vocalists, but the musicians as well. They've brought in no shortage of star power or talent there. Yeah, looking down the track list, there are definitely some that stick out. Anytime you get Joey Belladonna singing kind of classic rock songs, it always goes off well. So him doing Magic Power should be great. Lay It on the Line seems like the perfect track for Dee Snider. Like, I feel like that's of all of the Triumph big hits that fits him pretty well. I think that'll be good. Lawrence Gowan doing Somebody's Out There.
Yeah.
Dean Castronovo doing Never Surrender. Jack Blades, Follow Your Heart. And then Dino Jalusic doing Fight the Good Fight. I mean, that guy, you hear his name off and on a lot, kind of with like the Frontiers, like the modern melodic rock acts. Like, he kind of is like one of the super vocalists for them. So I'm sure that's going to be really awesome, and great band, a lot of great songs. It'll be cool to hear it.
I think it's interesting. They have two versions of Fight the Good Fight on the album. Nancy Wilson also doing vocals on a version of that. And that was one thing that really struck me, is when you look at the names and the songs, it feels like there was some care taken to try to line up vocal styles with the songs from Triumph, where it's like you see the name, like you mentioned, and it's like, oh, that makes total sense that they would do that song. So, yeah, I'm really excited for this. Triumph is criminally underrated, I think, whether it was because they were from Canada, whether it was the time that their hits kind of hit, whatever it may have been. Those guys are awesome. This should be a really awesome tribute album. I'm super excited to get a chance to listen to it. You can already go and pre-order the album, but it will also include a CD with a 12-page booklet and a double LP gatefold edition. So
sweet.
If you need to get your Triumph tribute in on LP, you can do that. But it should be great stuff. Looking forward to that coming up a little bit later on this year. That wraps up our news headlines. Just a reminder, check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. We are going to be back tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, with our Monday edition of the Nerdcast News Report. A big thanks to everybody that checked out our Friday edition. It was it was definitely our most listened to edition. We're really excited that our numbers continue to go up. We'll be back with you on Monday, tomorrow morning, for our latest edition of that. And then on Wednesday, normally we would come to you at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, but of course Wednesday is the big Nintendo Direct for Switch 2. So we're going to be, as it looks right now, check your local listings. We'll tell you on social media, but right now it looks like a late afternoon podcast that day where we'll have a chance to kind of digest everything that happens from the Direct and try to bring it to you. It's going to be pretty heavy on the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct on Wednesday, but that'll be an afternoon edition. And of course, next Sunday we'll be back with another episode of the Hard Rock Empire. Next week it'll be the music of March the 21st as we get into April. Hard to believe that we're already a quarter of the way through the year and almost a quarter of the way through the music for this year. But that'll be next Sunday night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. It's time to get into the music of March the 14th. That is what we've got this week. It's just a reminder, if you're listening on a podcast network, where of course you can get Apple, Spotify, wherever you want to download our podcast, you can listen to them there. You're not going to hear the music clips there. The places that you're guaranteed to hear them is live with us on Sunday nights on YouTube and Twitch. Sometimes the VOD gets them through. Most of the time they do, but the VOD can sometimes mute them. But again, you'll definitely want to check those out each and every week. And one thing I didn't mention as I get ready to continue into my spiel is this week we did pass 150 podcasts on the Nerdcast Empire. This is episode 152. Pretty wild that we're more than halfway to 200 already through the hundreds, but really cool stuff. We appreciate everybody for continuing to support us as things continue to roll along. But yeah, it is ticking along for sure. But as I will post in the chats right now, of course, each and every week, Mike will create a playlist, and that is what I will label this as. And basically goes through and pulls a couple different sources where there is a list of all the new releases for a given date. And then Mike will pull a track from those releases and put them on this playlist on YouTube, which you can check out. And I encourage you to do so because everybody's got different music tastes, and this will be a chance for you to choose your own favorite bands for this week. But once Mike creates a playlist, we go through and we pick a couple of bands and a couple of albums that we really like, and we present them to you on this podcast. That is how it works each and every week, and it has for now, this being the 59th episode of the Hard Rock Empire. But And it's time to get to Mike's picks for this week. Really good stuff again this week. Really excited about the bands that we're going to be talking about. Mike, get us started.
Yeah, it's amazing that as I go through my initial listen of the playlist each week, I kind of have that initial feeling of, okay, this is going to be a great week. This is going to be a solid week. And I initially didn't feel super confident about my first listening through the playlist. And then when I kind of pinpointed the albums that I most liked and got into them, I was kind of blown away by how good they were. So it's sometimes you can't really tell by an individual song. And sometimes because I throw them on the playlist without listening to them, I don't know ahead of time if I pick a winner or not. Like there are times where I inadvertently pick like the one instrumental track on an album that just doesn't really give you a really good indication of what you're getting into. And I have to go back and kind of do a little more research. But the ones that I did pick, the two that are my picks this week, the first track I heard stood out to me, and the more I got into them, the more I enjoyed them. So moving into pick number one for me, this is a side project. It's the second album from the side project of the guitarist from the band Haken. The side project is called Tiktaalika, and this album, the second one, is called Gods of Pangea.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get to dig into this one. I haven't had the chance to dig as far into this one yet, but this dude's really talented. Obviously, like you said, the guitarist of Haken, and really cool to see him kind of going off and doing his own thing. And it's what I've heard so far has got a great sound.
Yeah, so the man in question, Charlie Griffiths, he's the guitarist from the British progressive metal band Haken. Really big deal in kind of the progressive metal space nowadays. You look at the cover art, and when I tell you it's a side project of a progressive metal guitarist, your first thought is like, no, this looks like some random thrash album from 1988, and kind of it is.
Yeah.
As the Bandcamp for the album mentions, it's still rooted in progressive metal, but Charlie's using this as a side project to explore his love of 80s and 90s thrash metal, alternative rock, and technical metal. For this album specifically, it said he's going back to the golden era of metal. Think Merciful Fate, Judas Priest, Megadeth, and Metallica. Definitely the Megadeth and Metallica, that is front and center, I think, and for someone like me, I'm totally here for that. The band's rounded out by Darby Todd on drums, the Haken bassist Connor Green, with several guest vocalists kind of providing their services for various songs. We have Tommy Rogers from Between the Buried and Me, Daniel DeYoung from Textures, Vladimir Lalek from Organized Chaos, and Roddy Walker from Protest the Hero. So the second track on the album, the title track, sounds like something straight from Megadeth or Metallica. So when I first heard that, I thought, okay, I'm picking this. I'm going to listen to this, and I'm going to love it. And I certainly do and did. The Angry Metal Guy kind of gave it a mixed review, as he thought that having the variety of vocalists kind of kept the album from finding an identity on its own. It just felt kind of all over the place. He did say that there were some really good songs on the album, but he found them to be not necessarily memorable. He is spot on, though, with comparing Daniel DeYoung to Dave Mustaine. If you listen to the track Give Up the Ghost, it sounds straight like a Megadeth song, which one of my favorite bands, so not complaining here. I understand what Angry Metal Guy's talking about, but in some way, I think that's kind of what I like about this album, is you clearly have a guy who has his own career with Haken, he's doing well. Why wouldn't you bring in, if you're going to do any kind of side project, why wouldn't you bring in multiple vocalists and just kind of get a cool variety of sounds that kind of pay tribute to some of your inspirations? I don't think an album like this needs a singular identity. To me, each one kind of has a differentiating factor that makes it seem kind of new and fresh to me, despite being a tribute to bands that I'm already familiar with and that I enjoy. I love progressive metal. I love thrash metal. I got to imagine for someone like Charlie Griffiths, who plays really complicated prog metal, this has to be kind of a cool, like, more straightforward change of pace, just writing thrash songs. So really cool there. Standout tracks on the album include Tyrannicide, Mesozoic Mantras, Fault Lines, Give Up the Ghost, and the one that I picked to listen to, the title track, Gods of Pangea.
So let's check this out now. Tiktaalika with Gods of Pangaea. This is the title track and the second track off of this album, Gods of Pangaea, featuring Daniel DeYoung on vocals. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. You know, obviously, when Dave Mustaine decides he's not going to do music anymore, there won't be a Megadeth at that point. Like,
Yeah,
he
is Megadeth.
But if he ever decided he wanted to just become just back off and become like the general manager of Megadeth,
We're making a 5-person band. He could be half the lead guitarist with Timu and basically have a dedicated lead singer.
They could bring Daniel DeYoung in, and he could probably sing. If you tell me he's been in a Megadeth tribute band at some point, I am not going to be shocked at all.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's great. The sound is great. The music is great. The vocals are clean and just kind of, again, that thrash vibe that, you know, before we would have started doing this podcast, I would have guessed there weren't a ton of new bands out there doing this type of music. Obviously, I know different now that there are actually a lot of bands out there doing thrash, which is great. Again, like you said, you got a guy who's obviously already successful in his day job, if you will, with Hawken, but to be able to have a side project and be able to do a different type of music that's clearly influenced you in your career, I think is really awesome. And I'm really excited to actually go back and listen to this whole album because what I've heard of it really sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a listen. Really, really cool stuff.
So definitely check those guys out. Tiktaalika, again, that is the band of Charlie Griffiths. His
Also,
side
I didn't
project.
realize, just as a side note, I didn't realize that, like, I guess in England they spell Pangea differently than we do. Like, I don't remember spelling it like Gaia, but they do. But it's still pronounced Pangea. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little tidbit there.
Yeah, I think it's one of those British English sort of things there. But definitely check that out. Really good stuff from them. Mike's first pick for this week. As always, you have 2 picks. What do you have for pick number 2?
Yeah, so pick number 2. It's always interesting when I'm listening to the music and anything that sticks out to me, I do a little research right then and there to find out where they're from and kind of what we're looking at. And when we run into a country that we haven't featured before, it's always kind of neat. And there's sometimes a little bit of internal pressure, like I really want to like this, to say, hey, we've added another country to the list. But the reality is, if the music doesn't stand up, the music doesn't stand up. And this one here, I thought the track that I picked for the playlist was good, but man, I wasn't prepared for how good the rest of it was going to be. Like, I think the rest of this album just totally blew my sample track, which I believe was the title track, out of the water. But that being said, my second pick is the newest studio album from this band from Umag, Croatia. They are an industrial folk metal band. Their name is Manntra, and the album is Titan.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to go back and listen to the album because I did think the title, the track that was on the playlist was fine and certainly merited a further listen, but I didn't end up getting back around to it before I had my picks. But I'm definitely curious to hear how the rest of it sounds if you thought it was maybe on a different level above what was on the sample track.
Yeah, I definitely do. Wikipedia describes their sound as a fusion of traditional Croatian folk music with heavy metal, with elements of industrial and electronic music. They often employ traditional instruments such as the sopele, the tamburica, and the diple. They started back in 2011 and released their first 3 EPs in the Croatian language. After that, they switched over to English and occasionally German, which opened up their music to a much wider market. They sing about spirituality, mythology, personal struggle, as well as drawing from Croatian folklore and history. The guitars definitely have that industrial feel to them, and kind of the raspier vocals from Marko Matajevic, Sekul, work really well with the guitars. They mention on the Bandcamp that Nina Kraljek is credited for the folk vocals, so I don't know if that means she's doing the backing vocals anytime they have kind of the higher pitched harmonizing vocals along with Marco. I'm not totally sure how the breakdown of responsibilities go, but if that's the case, they're really cool and give this music even more of a kind of larger than life element that I always enjoy. I love when bands can incorporate something kind of regional or traditional to their locale, to their sound. I think it's a really cool way to set yourself apart from a world of bands who are industrial metal bands or industrial with a hint of folk. I think these guys do it really well, and you're not going to confuse them for Rammstein or any other industrial act. Standout tracks on the album include the title track, Titans, Tuta, The Heart of the Storm, Skull, Nav, and the track that I picked that I actually wanted to hear from the beginning on here because I think it's really a cool indication of what all they do with their sound. The track My Sandman.
Yeah, it's unusual that we have a song we play from the get-go, but that's what we're going to do today with Manntra and their album Titans. This is the 8th track off of that album, and it is the beginning of My Sandman. So let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Find this guys. So when the doors open up, I'm somewhere else. I'm long far gone.
Yeah, what a unique sound that is. Totally something different there. The male voice there sounds a little bit like the guy from System of a Down a bit.
Yeah.
Like kind of has that
A little bit of that, a little bit of the lead singer from Lordi. He kind of has that kind of like, I'm kind of a monster growling. It's not guttural vocals. It's not like black or death metal vocals, but it's not super clean either.
Yeah, it's not completely, grungy, but there is a bit of grunge to it, and it certainly contrasts the female vocals really well. But no, I'm really kind of interested to go back and check this out because that track was pretty awesome, honestly.
Yeah, it's totally different, and I would certainly recommend everyone give it a full listen.
Yeah, it's Manntra. Excited to have those guys on board. Another country checked off our list, and their album Titans, which is out now. You can pick that up wherever you get your rock and metal music. Time for me to move on to my 2 picks for this week, and I think if you go through and listen to the playlist, you will know that there was one that was pretty much a no-brainer that I was going to pick this week, so we'll jump right to it. It is the selection from Frontiers Records this week. It is the AOR melodic rock band from Sweden, Streetlight, with their new album, Night Vision. Honestly, this is another one of those albums that feels like it could be one of the top albums of the year of my picks once we're all said and done. This is their second album since they signed with Frontiers, first being 2023's Ignition. It's another example of Frontier somehow being able to find these melodic rock bands, generally in Europe. This is obviously Sweden, and put these guys in a studio and just make magic with them. It's just a great AOR album. It's one of the top ones, like I said, that I've heard this year. The band is Johannes Hager on lead vocals and guitars, Philip Stenlund on guitars, John Svensson on keys, Eric Nilsson on drums, and Johan Jernström on bass. It definitely feels like a very classic 1980s, mid-80s Journey. The Defenders of the Faith Metal's website called the keyboard parts Jonathan Cain-esque, which, I think you can definitely hear that when you get into the album. It's one of those things. I think if there is criticism, as you go through the websites, and we see this a lot with bands that have that feel of songs from the mid-80s, there is a formula to the success, but I would argue that if you execute the formula as well as you possibly can and as well as these guys did, I think that's completely okay. Like, not everything needs to be so far outside the box. I think sometimes you just do the thing you do really well and you create something really awesome because of it. And I feel like that's what these guys did here, and it's just a really, really good AOR album. Standout tracks include Long Distance Runner, Late Night Hollywood, Captured in the Night, and the track we're going to listen to on the podcast is Sleepwalk. So let's listen to these guys now. This is Streetlight with their new album, Night Vision. This is the third track off of this album, Sleepwalk. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. And while you hear the keys a lot, obviously you just heard a little bit of guitar there as well. Guitars are really solid in this. Again, it just they've got guys that really know what they're doing, and they play their instruments really well, and it all kind of melds together, and it's the magic of Frontiers that they find these bands that just can create amazing music in 2025. But I definitely love this album. One of my favorites of the year so far. Mike, your thoughts on Streetlight?
Yeah, I kind of going back to what you mentioned on the Defenders of the Faith Metal website, he said that, sure, there's nothing new going on with the grooves of Night Vision, but if I wanted to hear something new, I'd turn on the musical garbage heap that is Sirius XM Octane. If you're doing something that sounds good, it doesn't matter to me that you're not groundbreaking with it, that you're not changing the landscape of music. You don't have to do that. Just write good songs, play ear-pleasing music, and I'll be on board. It's funny that you mentioned that one review, because I read that article as well. And, he made a statement on defendersofthefaithmetal.com talking about how it never ceases to amaze him that Europe has this fascination with a genre that peaked commercially 40 years ago here in the States. And I just think, is that on us? Is that our problem? Because clearly rock to some degree is still viable in Europe because there are so many bands still doing it. It's viable in Japan because there's tons of Japanese rock music coming out every day that seems to also bring in young musicians to play it. We talked months ago about Avenged Sevenfold talking about hitting new markets to tour live because there's an appetite for it. It's just, are we as Americans, for whatever reason, just trained to be super fickle with our taste in music, where once we're done with something, we throw it away and we never want to hear it again?
Oh, the record labels have done that when they basically allowed a handful of companies to buy up all the radio stations in the U.S. So there was no longer that opportunity. Because I remember back in my day, when I worked at WSWO Radio in Wilmington, Ohio, we were an independent radio station. Now, we had playlists that came in, but we had shows on our radio station. It was country music at the time that would play stuff that was not on any corporate playlist. Like, I don't think you find that in U.S. radio anymore. And obviously, that station was bought by Clear Channel at the time, which has become iHeartMedia and all this other stuff. Those days are dead here, but they seem to be alive and well everywhere else in the world. And that's why a lot of these great bands come from overseas, because this music never died there. They've continued to love music that sounds like this since the mid-'80s.
And why not? I
mean,
good music is good music. If I like a certain style of music, I don't quit liking it. When we talk about going into the vault each week, it's like, there aren't CDs in my vault where I'm like, why do I own that? I hate that. That's terrible. Everything I own is stuff that I enjoyed once and still enjoy. So to me, it's not weird to think there's still music like this being made once I learned there was still music like this being made. Like, it caught me off guard at first because over here you never hear about it. But now that I know it exists, of course it exists.
Well, you know what's more frustrating than finding out about these bands that are in Sweden that are still making this music is to find out there are bands here in the United States in some of the biggest cities in the U.S. that are making great music that we also haven't heard about, which is a great segue into my second pick. We are headed to the city of New York, specifically Brooklyn, New York, for this heavy metal power trio, Sanhedrin, with their new album, Heat Lightning. And again, it's one thing when we realize, hey, these bands are from overseas. This is why we don't hear about them and all this other stuff. This group's from the United States, and they've been rocking since 2015. This is their 4th full-length album. The band is Erica Stoltz on vocals and bass, Nathan Honor on drums, and Jeremy Sosville on guitars and backing vocals. And again, you want to talk about a group that is found an influence. This is a group that's playing very classic heavy metal. There's some modern, touches there that really makes it still feel modern, but it's very classic. And I think it's pretty impressive that this is just a trio, because I feel like this album, the one thing that really stood out to me was it feels like such a bigger sound than you would get out of 3 people, and I think they deserve a ton of credit for that. While some of the songs do feel like they could have come from the 80s, to me, this album isn't as dated, isn't as pigeonholed as an 80s album as, say, the first choice I had, Streetlight. And that's nothing against Streetlight. It's just that's the sound they were going for. These guys, it feels almost more influential than it does tribute. Because, and the other thing, too, is they clearly have a lot of varied influences. And because of that, this is not one of those albums that end up on the playlist where we listen to it and it's like, oh, we like that song on the playlist, and then there's 12 more songs that sound exactly the same on the album. Like, a lot of the songs feel very different, and I think that's really awesome, because that really makes it a very easy listen when the songs have such a variety to it. There's some new wave of British heavy metal vibes, some classic rock of the 80s vibes. But if you're looking for a modern take on classic metal, you should pick this up immediately, because I think this is really, really excellent stuff. Standout tracks include the title track, Heat Lightning, Let's Spill Some Blood, Blind Wolf, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast, Franklin County Line. So let's check these guys out. Sanhedrin, out of New York City, Brooklyn, New York, with their new album, Heat Lightning. This is the 6th track off of this album, Franklin County Line. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Smoking and drinking, fornicating, and fighting all night. They cannot be seen from the roadside by the Franklin County line. Down on the Cold Deer River, out near the bend as it winds, beyond the steel deck bridge, Franklin County line.
I just obviously I think the chorus is great, but again that whole music pickup right after the chorus is just so classic, just really awesome stuff. Like I said, this was a lot of fun. This listen, and again being produced right here in the United States, but again you're not going to find this on satellite radio, at least not on any channel that I listen to, and that's a shame. Mike, your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, I thought that track of what I listened to was one of the more like new wave of British heavy metal inspired sounds, as far as the riffing and kind of the guitar after the chorus as well. But really, really cool. The website, the new wave of traditional heavy metal.com, referred to the album saying it's the fullest representation of what this band's capable of compared to some of their older work. They attributed it possibly to a change in studio and producer, bringing in some fresh ears and a fresh environment that might have brought out a new level of creativity from these guys. But yeah, it's funny when you see people refer, I can't remember if it was that site or one of the others I looked at, that referred to the band as being on kind of the forefront of kind of the traditional metal scene here in the States for a while. And you're just like, what scene? What forefront? Why? Not that I've always been the most plugged in, but I feel like at some point this would have popped up on my radar sooner. Like, it's obviously not the band's fault. It's not my fault. Someone else dropped the ball as far as why is this not being thrown into my face as being really great power trio rock music that, kind of to your point, doesn't feel necessarily dated because it's just really good hard rock.
Yeah, and they really do it very well. And again, just you've got 3 people that really just everything meshes really well together, and I think it's just really well done. And again, it's crazy when you see these bands that, again, Brooklyn, and we're not hearing about them until we basically have to find them on this podcast. And
yeah,
people need to know about this band. Really, all 4 bands that we talked about tonight.
It's a big week.
Big week, really great stuff. Definitely, and as we talk about, and I try to remind everybody from time to time, buy the album, see them live. buy their merch, support these bands. We want them to continue to make great music.
Find them on Napster.
Find them on Napster if they exist on there. Support them however you can. Hopefully they'll continue to be able to make awesome music.
One more follow-up question about that album.
Yeah.
Is heat lightning a real thing?
No. Heat lightning is not real.
I thought that was the case.
Heat lightning is lightning. If there's lightning somewhere, it does exist. It's not.
Because that would also imply that there's cold lightning.
It's true, which sounds terrifying, honestly.
Big bolt of ice.
But yes, Heat Lightning isn't real, but that album is real, and you should definitely pick it up right away. That gets us through our new music for this week. It's time to head into the vault, where Mike and I will tell you about a classic album you need to pick up. Mike is literally going through his vault, going through all the albums that he owns, and we are up to the letter E, which certainly gives you some really awesome choices of bands that we love to talk about on this podcast. But, sometimes you just have to choose one of those bands because there's a reason we talk about them a lot on this podcast, and it's because they're awesome. What do you have for us in the vault this week?
Yeah, I didn't really think I'd run into difficulty choosing already by the letter E. I thought there'd be a lot out there, but it turns out the overwhelming majority of my letter E albums are either Edguy, Extreme, and actually do own a few Eagles CDs.
Oh, nice.
And we talk about them from time to time as well.
For sure.
The one I ended up going with was one that was not featured in your yearly run through the vault. One of the albums from this band that was not already mentioned. It is, as of right now, the last studio album and the 10th studio album from legendary German power metal band Edguy. Album came out in 2014. It is Space Police, Defenders of the Crown.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy this album. I don't know if I enjoy it as much as some of the ones I did feature as we ran through the vault, but it's still a really good album. And had I known that we weren't going to get any more Edguy after this album, I probably would have enjoyed it more and really appreciated it. But it is still a really good album, and it is kind of sad that we haven't had more Edguy, although certainly Advantageous is doing very well. So I guess that works out pretty well unless you're a diehard Edguy fan.
Yeah, and you do have to wonder, with the most recent Avantasia kind of feeling at times a little like it's veering toward the Edguy side of things. It's hard to say. I would definitely love to see more Edguy in the future. I mentioned this album came out in 2014. They did have the compilation Monuments that came out a few years later, but as far as full albums of new material, this has been it. They've been on a hiatus since 2020. According to Wikipedia, Tobias Sammet stated on Facebook that at the time he was focused on new Avantasia music, and that's just kind of what felt right to him to work on. He also said that the production process of Space Police was exhausting, so maybe he just still needs some time away from this, and maybe on the other side of Here Be Dragons, we'll see Edguy reconvene, which would be really cool. In promoting the album, he said that it was the heaviest that they've done, and it would kind of be the measuring stick for all future Edguy albums. So, the new ones haven't really measured up yet since there haven't been any. But that's kind of wild to think that he thought this was such a landmark album, and then that was 11 years ago, and
maybe he just can't create something better in his mind. So it's like, well, if I can't measure up to this, we're not going to do anymore.
It's certainly possible. But yeah, it's hard to say, and I'm curious if there ever ends up being a new Edguy. Like, man, what's it gonna sound like?
Sure.
They opted to name the album kind of using two title tracks from the CD. They mentioned that Space Police sounded like something Frank Zappa or David Bowie would use as a title, and something that no metal band would ever name their album. So they liked that. They also liked Defenders of the Crown because it was kind of a reference to this notion that Edguy were the defenders of the heavy metal crown. I don't know who currently is wearing it, given the long hiatus, but someone's got to be.
Sure.
Kind of going through the album, you got your quintessential, like, classic Edguy sounding songs, like Space Police, Defenders of the Crown. You do have some heavier ones. Saber and Torch, which was like the first song they kind of premiered in preparation of this album coming out. Definitely a little heavier than their typical stuff, and didn't feel like classic Edguy to me. I still enjoyed it. It was still melodic, but it just felt like that was maybe hinting toward them going in a different direction. And I still really like the song. You had other heavier tracks like The Realms of Baba Yaga. Do Me Like a Caveman was a way better song than you would assume based on the title. A cover of Rock Me Amadeus, Falco, which is a classic track, of course. Wikipedia mentioned he had wanted to do Der Kommissar, but was talked out of it. I either one, you can't go wrong, no matter which one you go with. Kind of my favorite track on the album, which again doesn't feel super reminiscent of Edguy, is Alone in Myself. It's kind of a more, I don't want to say emo. That's probably not the right way to explain it, but definitely more emotive as far as the theme and kind of the vibe of the song, but definitely really good. And then it ends with the longest track of the album, this epic Eternal Wayfarer, which is a great last track, definitely worth listening to. The album itself, all things considered, is great. I'm a huge fan of Avantasia too, so no matter what Tobias Sammet does, I'm probably going to enjoy it. Overall, the standout tracks on the album, in my opinion, are Saber and Torch, Space Police, Love Tiger, The Realms of Baba Yaga, Alone in Myself, and Eternal Wayfarer. This probably isn't the album I'd recommend if you hadn't heard Edguy before, as far as this is where you break into them, but still worth a listen. It's a solid entry into their catalog for sure.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's good, and then I certainly not reflective of how I think that it's bad, and that's why I didn't talk about it. But like I said, there are just some other ones that are kind of resonate more with me than this one. But I think it is, once you've gotten into Edguy, I think you're going to really enjoy this album. There's a lot of really good stuff on there. And again, had I known that we weren't going to get any more Edguy, maybe I need to give it more listens. Maybe that'll pump up their numbers and they'll decide that there's a market for Edguy again. But these guys are awesome. Avantasia is awesome too. So it's all good. But yeah, definitely jump into Edguy. And, again, maybe this isn't the best entry point, but it is a really good album. Definitely check out Space Police, Defenders of the Crown, Mike's Vault pick for this week. I'm continuing through the Vault picks, and as I mentioned a few weeks ago, we are now jumping into Frontiers bands. And what I've decided to do is spend 2 weeks on each letter. I'm going to take the first week, and I will pick a band and then pick an album. And then the second week, I'm going to put all the remaining bands of that letter in a randomizer and have it pick me a band, and then I will pick an album. And again, my general rule for this is that I'm going to pick an album that was released by Frontiers, because some of these bands have been around a long time, and Frontiers kind of picks them up on the back half of their career. And I don't want to cheat and pick some big album that was clearly not a Frontiers album in the early part of their career. So that's kind of what we're doing here. And so the randomizer gave me a band called Airrace to pick this week. Airrace was what was a short-lived British heavy metal group founded in 1983. Featured singer Keith Morrell, guitarist Laurie Mansworth, bassist Jim Reed, keyboard player Toby Sadler, and a drummer who you might have heard of somewhere down the line, Jason Bonham, the son of John Bonham.
Yeah.
This was his first band, as it turns out.
Had no idea.
Had no idea until I started doing this. They made one album in 1984 and then unfortunately broke up. They did get back together, which was really cool. And they signed with Frontiers because that's what you do. And they released some good stuff through Frontiers. And then, unfortunately, they were kind of set to go their separate ways and decided that they were going to kind of be done as Airrace. So they announced a final show in early 2020, which got postponed until November 2020 because of the pandemic. And then even in November, things weren't any better in the UK, so they never got their final show. And these guys all kind of went on to do their own separate projects, which is kind of sad, to be honest with you. But these guys are still very much worth a listen. And I really enjoyed this album. The album Untold Stories, which was released in 2018. If you like AOR type sounds, it's good stuff. But there's also there's clearly some prog type influences there. You could hear some stuff from 70s type bands. I even saw one review kind of compare their sound to ELO, which there's a little bit of that on here as well, which isn't too surprising considering when they started as a band would have been contemporaries of a band like ELO. But again, it's like so many of these Frontiers bands, they bring an album out and it sounds great. And it's just why couldn't you guys continue? I don't know why they ended up breaking up or deciding not to go on. Unfortunately, they didn't have a Wikipedia page, so it was kind of hard to get the full story behind that. But they've gone on to do their own things, which, certainly good luck with that. But maybe somewhere down the road they'll get back together and release something new with Frontiers, which would be really cool. But I definitely encourage everybody to check this out. Standout tracks included Running Out of Time, Eyes Like Ice, New Skin, and Summer Rain. Just a really enjoyable listen, these guys. And I definitely want to maybe go back and check out the rest of their catalog, including some of their early stuff, to see what that sounds like. And maybe, again, someday they'll show up on our playlist. But it's just interesting when these bands kind of go away for a long time, then they come back, and then they go away again. It's kind of sad, honestly.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. And I mean, you couldn't have predicted what would happen. Like, yeah, we're going to have our big last concert, and then, the world gets destroyed over a matter of a few years. But I wonder, as you go through these bands from Frontiers, how many times you're going to run into that, where not just a band that started a long time ago had a long break and then reemerged, but also bands that had that one really big name member that either it was an early band of theirs or a later side project that we just weren't aware of, like with Airrace. I get the feeling that might be a common thing that we're going to run into as you run through the alphabet.
And I should note the cast and crew on this album was Adam Payne on vocals, Laurie Mansworth still there for guitars, Rocky Newton on bass, Linda Kelsey Foster on keyboards, and Donnie Mansworth on drums. This is a group that supported Queen, AC/DC, Meatloaf back in 1984 and 1985. But again, unfortunately, just whatever reason, didn't get any farther than that and ended up basically breaking up. But yeah, I have a feeling this is not going to be the last time. I mean, it's 2 weeks in a row I picked a Frontiers band that's kind of had an unhappy ending.
Yeah, that's really disappointing.
So my hope is that they won't all be that way. We'll start off with the letter B next week, but should be really interesting to see. But yeah, definitely check out Airrace. They sounded good, and it's just kind of sad that they didn't get to have that final show that they were looking for. But that wraps up the vault for this week. And of course, I forgot to switch over my thing to the Airrace on the countdown, but there it was there. And now let's move on to the Power Trio. And this is a new segment on our show we started last week, where somewhere in the Discord in a given week, one of us comes up with an idea for a question, and then we post it in the Discord for you to give us feedback on. And then, of course, we tell you our feedback when we get to the episode. And this week's question was the top 3 non-metal or non-hard rock songs that we would want metal covers of. So, obviously, some of these types of songs have gotten metal covers because there are people with good taste in music. And,
absolutely,
they eventually find this out. And but we're going to each go through and do that. I believe you have a couple of different... Chris is posting his in the chat right now.
Yeah.
We'll get to those in a moment, but I believe your buddy Shane also has weighed in on this one as well.
Yeah, so it's always good, like I mentioned last week, to get the opinion of someone who doesn't quite have the same music taste or alignment as us. We share a lot of bands in common, but he definitely hears a lot different music than I do on a weekly basis, and his response really this time around was anything Taylor Swift.
Yeah, he's
Which,
right.
Obviously, she's one of the biggest artists on the planet right now. So, and has always been known as a songwriter and singer. So, I could certainly see where maybe that could be an interesting route to go. He mentioned the band I Prevail covering Blank Space a while back and saying it was amazing. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not really familiar with any of her songs, but I can't deny that given her scope and reach, it would be probably kind of a fun thing to do to cover one of her songs in a hard rock or metal way.
Yeah, as I've talked about before, and we talked about it off the air, I'm a little more familiar with popular music because I broadcast sports. So all of these like hype song, type songs they play before games almost always have a lot of current stuff in there. With baseball and softball, sometimes you get some retro stuff too. But so yeah, I will hear her. Another artist who would probably make sense for this is someone like Chapel Roan. A song like Hot to Go or Good Luck Babe would probably make good metal songs. I didn't list those, but yeah, any kind of modern pop artist that is really, really popular would make a lot of sense for this list as well. Chris has listed some in there as some really good options as well in the chat. What do you got if you want to go through what Chris has posted for those who maybe aren't able to see the chat right now?
Yeah, for sure. So his pick 1 is Abacab by Genesis.
It's a good song.
Like, it's hard to when you get these picks to not then start thinking of the band, because I mean I wasn't really thinking the bands that he chose weren't ones that really entered my mind when I was doing this quick little exercise of picking 3 songs. But when you look at the bands he did pick, you're like, man, you just start thinking of all the songs from them that you would love to hear. And for something like Genesis, to me, like, and it's probably been covered by a metal band because it's such a kind of proto hard rock song.
Yeah.
Is 1973's Dancing with the Moonlit Night from their album Selling England by the Pound. That for like ultra proggy Genesis, that was a pretty heavy song at times, and to me that's the one that stands out as like that would be a really cool song to hear a cover of.
You got a lot of the prog stuff of the 70s that totally would, and Abacab is certainly a good choice in that. And then of course we've already had a cover of Land of Confusion.
Yeah,
which
great cover.
It was a great cover.
Shock the Monkey. But you think of other songs like I just lost it in my head, but there's a lot of early Phil Collins era stuff that was, really poppy rock type stuff that could make great metal songs, like Don't Lose My Number. That would be a great one.
That was the one that I just lost it out of my head there. But there's just a ton of stuff from that era of Genesis too that would also make for great metal stuff. But
it's difficult for me in that later era to remember what's Genesis and what's Phil Collins.
Yes.
I just kind of equate them as being the same at that point.
Yeah, because there's also a lot of Phil Collins stuff that could be on this list as well. But that was Chris's first pick. What does he got for number 2?
Yeah, so for pick number 2 from Chris, we're looking at Synchronicity 2 by The Police.
Not Scrantonicity.
I'm no longer a part of.
That's all I could see.
They have an applause meter, so it's important that you cheer for my band, Scrantonicity 2.
Everybody should watch The Office
Not
if you haven't. It's very important to get every reference on our podcast. But no, The Police, another band that makes a lot of sense for a lot of the same reasons that Genesis does.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't really go wrong picking any song by The Police. Kind of in that same era, I'm thinking like Wrapped Around Your Finger would be a great song to cover. But yeah, I mean, that's great. And moving on to his last pick, the song that I would think of for this, I'm sure has been covered before. There's no way it hasn't. But pick number 3 for Chris, we were looking at Men at Work's Who Can It Be Now?
Yeah, that'd be a great choice. Men at Work's got a lot of great stuff. The one, obviously, I don't know if you're thinking of.
Probably the same one.
Overkill.
Yeah.
Overkill's got to have been covered as a metal song. That's an amazing, and maybe one of the best songs of the 80s by anybody. It's just really good stuff.
But no, that's Men at Work.
Yeah, it's totally would work, I think, and that was another band that we talk a lot about hair bands.
Another one,
and they get pigeonholed, but I feel like there's a lot of '80s bands that came out in that rock era of the MTV era that probably got pigeonholed as being a little superficial. These guys probably were one of them.
I think their music video painted them out to be really goofy.
Yeah, and I think that's not really fair. And I think Overkill was kind of that song that maybe everybody kind of pivoted and realized, hey, these guys are really talented.
Yeah, these guys can write something with substance, I
what,
suppose.
What did you just think of?
Well, kind of with a similarly named act, but not the same. The Safety Dance, Men Without Hats.
Yeah.
I mean,
my buddy Dan, who I worked with many years ago, would have loved all these picks. Genesis and Men at Work, some of his favorite bands, for sure. No, that would totally make a lot of. I bet Safety Dance has had a metal cover.
I'm sure. I would hope.
But yeah, good stuff there for sure. Mike, why don't you get onto your list here?
Yeah, so I was kind of more in like the soft rock mode as far as my choices. So
I'm wondering, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but at some point. Because we don't discuss these. We want to make this clear.
I've not mentioned any of my 3 to anybody.
Yeah, so at some point we're going to pick the same song.
Yeah. Because
we have some overlapping music tape, probably a lot of overlapping music tape, but also overlapping existing in the same space as, the radio space. So before you get to your picks, I just want to throw that out there because at some point on this question, we're going to pick the same answer.
This is the first time anyone has heard my picks.
Yeah, I still don't know.
I even mentioned in our Discord chat, I mentioned one that I wasn't going to pick because it was one that I had talked about previously, and it was kind of a known thing, so I didn't want to choose it. So for pick number 1, I think this is a fairly obvious one for me. It's a song that is so atypical for what I like, but I love the song. And that is Someone Saved My Life Tonight by Elton John.
Yeah, of course.
From 1975's Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy.
Somebody should have done a metal cover of that if they haven't already. That is an amazing song.
Oh, tremendous song. And I remember it takes me back to back in high school. Obviously, the song wasn't new back then, but it was on the radio fairly enough. And just a legendary song. Moving forward in history a little bit into the 80s, the song "The Promise" by When in Rome.
Yes. That's
another just great 80s, like softer new wave kind of song. I would love to hear a metal version of it.
For sure. That's great. That's a great song.
Yeah, I think so as well. And pick number 3, I was kind of torn with this artist. There were 2 songs that I had on my mind that I thought, man, I want to hear a cover of both of these. I ended up going with kind of my second choice, and that is the song Downtown Train by Rod Stewart from the 1991 album Vagabond Heart.
I love that song. That is one of Rhythm of My Heart.
Those are the 2 I was debating.
Because that's another great song. Like, I would love to hear a metal cover.
But I was
of
just
that.
thinking, man, the chorus of Downtown Train in metal form could actually be really, really cool. Someone needs to get on that.
That's awesome. Those are great choices for sure. We did not duplicate it.
How about
turns
that?
out. We did. If I did pick a band for the first song that we have, you did mention just a moment ago when you were talking about the Vault, not Edguy, but one of the other E-picks, the Eagles. The song "The Last Resort" by the Eagles, which
song.
To me I think is their
Best Eagles song.
Is their best Eagles song. But it's such a gritty topic that I think it could also make for a really great metal song.
Well, I think this kind of goes back to in our chat when I was talking about Jagpanzer doing the cover of Wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
I think any kind of like story kind of song, which it is, would lend itself well to a metal cover.
For sure. I think so too. The other 2 are coming from my pop era of the late 80s, early 90s. The second one is Rhythm of the Night by DeBarge.
Yeah.
That's just...
See, we talked about that on the podcast like a year ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. But I couldn't not mention
Still
it.
waiting on Floating Worlds to do that cover since they referenced it when reaching out to me after I picked their album.
I just couldn't not put it up there again. So, and the last one is Hold On by Wilson Phillips.
Oh, yeah.
Like, to me, like, you
just do a whole Wilson Phillips cover album.
Totally. Like, I would totally be on board with that. They're so good, and sometimes I forget how good they are, and they would just pop up on like satellite radio, and it's like, man, these guys were so good. And Hold On is about one of them's run through AA. That it was like basically, and
just like Dream Theater.
Yeah, as it turns out, and one of the male executives that they played the song for was like, that song's not going anywhere. And turns out it did. It was one of their biggest hits. One of These Nights is another really good Eagles song that Chris mentioned. For sure. It's just, again, this is the best part of this power trio is that you can just really start to take off. And we want to know your picks.
I think I already got like my next 3 figured out. I think I'm going to move more into kind of the 90s like dance music.
Yes.
Some Ace of Base. Also, another one from kind of the early 2000s, The Corrs.
Yeah,
Breathless.
I love that song. But then there was like that one that did all the 90s dance songs that they like parodied on In Living Color. Like You Gotta Be and I can't remember the name of the song is. It's a woman who's the name of the group, and it was just she had just a slew of hits in the mid 90s that are all like these dance songs. I'll think of it before the next podcast.
You talked about the Eagles earlier. I also thought of the song from one of their newest albums, Long Road Out of Eden.
Yeah.
I feel like that had a lot of like, Last Resort vibes to it. It's a 10-minute song. Like clearly they were kind of going for that same feel, and that was a really good track too.
New York Minute by Don Henley, if you want to get into the solo stuff.
Last Worthless Evening.
Last Worthless Evening for sure. Sunset Grill, it's just a lot. Again, we can go on forever about this topic, and that's what this is supposed to do. Again, join our Discord. Links are in the chat for our YouTube and Twitch friends. Tell us what your 3 is. We definitely want to know. Leave them in the comments of the YouTube VOD if you can. We'd love to know what are the 3 non-metal and hard rock songs that you'd love to see a metal cover of. And who knows, maybe one of these metal and rock bands that we talk about every week will see the comments and we'll make this happen and we can talk about it on the podcast.
Should we ever revisit this category? I think we have to turn it up a notch and have not only are you saying what song should be covered, but who should cover it.
That would be fun too.
That way you're also thinking of like what the final product should sound like.
I can't pick Nestor or Floating Worlds for every choice.
No, of course not.
For sure. That would be really cool as well. Great stuff this week on the Hard Rock Empire. But alas, it is time to bring the Hard Rock Empire to a close for this Sunday. Great to have you along with us once again. Just a reminder, we'll be back just a little over 12 hours time with the Nerdcast News Report. We'll get you ready for your nerdy week with all the nerdy headlines you need to know, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. And then again, Wednesday, we'll be on the afternoon to talk about the Direct from Nintendo. That'll be coming up. I'll let you know what time a little later on in the week. Next week, Sunday night, 7 o'clock Eastern time, another episode of the Hard Rock Empire as we talk about the music of March the 21st. Big thanks to Chris for joining us with his picks. We really appreciate that. A big thanks to Mike for putting all this together. A big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. And a big thanks to you, wherever and whenever you're listening to us. We appreciate you. Thank you so very much. We'll see you again tomorrow morning for another episode of the Nerdcast News Report, and next week for another episode of the Hard Rock Empire. And until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.